Hi, I'm Melissa. Um, Perletsky and Silverstein offer children avenues into language by using words that are not condescending to children. They don't dumb things down or assume a word would be too complicated for a child to read. Um, while reading the poems by either author, I found that there are words that even I had trouble pronouncing. But when I had trouble, I was able to use the rhyme as kind of an aid to figure out the word. In doing so, this kind of gave me some insight on how a child might experience large words. They aren't as intimidating as an adult might assume, and the children have an easier time figuring out the words than we sometimes give them credit for. For example, the other night the television wasn't working, and my nieces and I all sat in the living room taking turns reading New Kid on the Block out loud. We had a lot of fun using funny voices, and my 9-year-old niece allowed me to see how more difficult words were like easily absorbed, because she kind of used the same technique in terms of like sounding it out and then kind of looking ahead and seeing what the word kind of is supposed to rhyme with. Um, as a kid reading Silverstein, I remember the humor more than the vocabulary. I don't really like vividly remember like new words or words being hard. I just remember how funny it was. Um, but there are a lot of multisyllabic words that are used in both of these kinds of works that kind of stick without the reader really realizing it. Um, and the definition is given in context without like directly explaining what the word means. And the rhythm and the cadence and their type of poetry makes learning fun. This week I read the required reading plus two from the Poet Laureate list that was provided. I read a book called The Wild Book by Margarita Engel, which isn't really like a book of poems, how like Perletsky's were, but it's a novel written in verse, which is a type of poetry, or poetry style. It was published in 2012, and each verse follows a girl with dyslexia. I liked how Engel used a lot of clever ways to describe like what was said to be known as word blindness, which is what they called dyslexia. She describes words jumping from the page as if trying to escape, and I like the way she created a way for us to see the books and words, how FIFA, the main character, saw them. I really liked this style of poetry. It had a lot of poetry metaphors, but they all made sense and tied together. And sometimes I don't really like poetry that just seems weird and doesn't have a purpose. I liked this style, had a purpose of telling a story, and it flowed really beautifully together. The other book I read from the list was by Jack Perletsky called Be Glad Your Nose is on Your Face and Other Poems, published in 2008. This book was a collection of favorites from his earlier publications. Opening the book, the illustrations, like immediately you can see they've gotten a major upgrade since 1984's New Kid on the Block, which were just little sketches and scribbles. The illustrations are vibrant, colorful, detailed, and fit really well with the poems. I like the cadence in most of his poems, though I found the cadence works a lot better when you read it aloud. For whatever reason, the poems don't have the right rhythm when you're reading them in your head, or at least for me. And at first, I didn't really like Perletsky. I sort of felt like he was like a generic Shel Silverstein. But as I read some more and read them out loud, I grew to enjoy the work, but I still prefer Shel. And then just in closing, I've never read Perletsky as a child. It makes me wonder if there are like Shel people and Jack people in this world. I would probably consider myself a shell, but only because I grew up on his silly poems. He's very familiar. Jack's poems seem familiar, but in an unfamiliar way, if that makes any sense. Not that they're any better or worse, but I find myself wondering if I would be able to do like a Jack Shell challenge, like a blind challenge, like a Coke and Pepsi challenge to see, like, I don't think that I would be able to tell the difference, if I'm being honest. Their style's very similar, and in their earlier works, the artwork is really similar too. And thank you for listening.